Hey everybody, and welcome back. We have another fuel system video for you today. You could also consider it an introductory video to the turbo build as well, because we are going to be installing Flow Force injectors. They are 640 cc's and they are EV14 injectors, which give a better spray pattern. So we're going to be putting those on the car, and as some bonus material in the second half of this video, we will be installing a flex fuel sensor as well. It's a GM flex fuel sensor, and if you've seen my earlier Megasquirt build videos in the harness, you may have noticed that I left open the wiring for the flex input, and we're going to be actually hooking that up today. So we're also going to install some updated hoses that are better spec'd out for running ethanol, and so we're going to show you that whole process. So stay tuned. So assembling your Flow Force injectors is pretty straightforward. It's going to be laid out in basically this order. Down here we've got 3 spacer washers, which are going to go onto the stock fuel rail spacers, and there's only 3 of them because there's 3 bolts, and then otherwise everything else is, we've got four of them, 1 for each injector. So we've got this bottom cushion, it's going to go on the bottom here. We've got this O-ring, which should already be installed. The top hat is going to go over it, and this O-ring is going to go into this groove on the top hat, and then this little secondary filter basket is going to slide right into there, basket first. So we're going to put those together now. Oops. On. Okay. All right. Now these baskets should go in all the way. This one's a little crooked. You can see I dropped it in there a little bit off, so you can just sort of it's easier when you just drop it straight down, but you can just sort of tap it out and then get that lined up correctly. All right. And before we go and install the top hats on top, you're going to put a little of this lube. It's a silicon-based lube, it says with PTFE, around on the O-ring here, and then you could also put some on the cushion, I guess. But this is going to make sure that the O-ring doesn't tear or do anything when you insert it into the fuel rail and insert it into the block. Today's video is sponsored in part by mkturbo.com. At mkturbo.com you can get budget turbos that really work. Easy 200 wheel horsepower. With even the lowest stage kit, the stage 1 kit, you get a log style manifold, T3 turbo, which is very fast spooling, 2.5 inch to 3 inch downpipe, and a full 3 inch exhaust all the way back to the muffler, including a MagnaFlow muffler. All this is V-band connected, so that you can bolt it on very quickly. And the upgraded kits, for a few bucks more, you can add intercooling with blow-off valve piping and all that. And the highest end kit gives you everything you need out the door, including injectors, including the ECU, engine management system, cone filter with intake. It's a complete kit. It's for way less than you would pay anywhere else. So check them out, mkturbo.com. So back out at the car, we've got the injectors all set up and ready to go. The harness assembly that's going to plug into the injectors and connect to your OEM harness. We've got the GM Flex Fuel sensor. This is the smaller version, not the larger one, but it's by Continental as well. And we've got some Dorman fuel line connectors, you do not want to put a hose directly onto these. It's not meant for that. It's supposed to go onto something like this, a barb, and then this is supposed to connect to the actual sensor. And then we've got a pigtail as well for that, and we're going to wire it into the car. It's very simple. It has 3 leads, a power, a ground, and an output line that's going to go into the ECU. So the first thing to do when working on your fuel system is to depressurize the line. And now, honestly, if your car has been sitting overnight or for a few hours, there's not going to be much pressure in the line, so you really don't have to do much. However, I do like to pop the cap on the back, and then also the way the factory manual recommends depressurizing the line is to, while the car is running, to pull the fuel injection plug, which is a yellow plug that's located under the steering column. And the other option is to simply come over here to your fuse box on this side and pull the fuel relay, and that will do the same thing. Let the engine die, and that means your pressure will be out. Now, when you're taking these things apart, you will want to have a rag nearby for the first initial disconnect, because there will be a little bit of fuel spilling out, so you want to make sure that doesn't spurt places, and you want to wear appropriate protection for your eyes and potentially your face. Alright, so we're going to get these hoses off, and it might be a good idea to just make a little mark on which one is the fuel input line and what is the return line. The white dots indicate the input line, which is going to go around to the front of the rail, which is down here. And so that way we don't get it mixed up. We're going to be replacing these hoses, but what I'm going to be doing is measuring them out based on the existing hose. And it's very easy to do a replacement of the hoses while the rail is off, because the other side of these things are kind of hard to get to when the rail is on the car. It's really kind of impossible. So while we've got this off, we can just replace this, and I'm going to put these heat shield things back on, and we'll be ready to go. You might want a selection of tools to get those clips off. I love my little hose needle nose pliers, which give you nice grip to be able to get on that old hoses and break the seal without damaging them and taking them off. So if you're not replacing your hoses, then you can use these to do it cleanly. Alright, so we got those off, and just to take a look at this, like kind of a close-up of this, you can see the interior of the hose is pretty good, but it's kind of cracking. It's got that inner lining, but it's kind of cracking around just outside the lining, so that's no good. So definitely time to replace these hoses. Alright, so to remove our fuel rail, we've just got a few things to get out of the way to make our access a little bit easier. We've got our little hose for the PCV valve that's over here, and we've got the solenoid here, which needs to be unclipped. So we'll go ahead and do that. This is a good time to inspect these vacuum lines. These are fairly, these are brand new really, because I installed the Megasquirt with a MAP sensor, pressure sensor, replacing the MAF, and so I replaced all these. However, this is one of the original ones, and it is super stiff. So when I take this off, I'm probably going to replace this line that goes in here to the solenoid. So on the 1.8s, you've got this little solenoid here, and after looking at it, I decided I was definitely going to break that little clip. So instead, you can reach under here with a little 1/4-inch deep well for a 10mm and get at the actual bolt for the bracket. And so I'm just going to take that bolt out and take the whole bracket off, and that will make sure that it keeps this clip from breaking off and then having this be kind of rattly for the rest of its life. So interestingly, there was some thread sealant on this little bolt, and so I don't know if this hole actually does penetrate down into the intake manifold, but when I reinstall, I'm going to put some more, clean that off and put some more thread sealant on there just in case. And this is what the clip looks like from the back. you basically push on the what is now the upper side and slide it towards the firewall here, going that way. But I think I made the right choice. I'll probably take this bracket off anyway, just to give myself some more clearance in manipulating the fuel rail when it goes in and out. So we'll get this little vacuum line off of here, and we'll move this off to one side. All right, so we broke these bolts loose. They should be torqued pretty lightly. The torque spec on these are about 15 foot-pounds, so kind of like your spark plugs. And right behind here are 3 little spacers, which you want to not lose. And you can get in there with a pick tool or something like that, just to sort of grab them so that they can work out. And this is what they look like. Lay that to one side, and then we can get the fuel rail out. All right, got that sucker out, and it wouldn't hurt at this point to give it a nice cleaning. And we're also going to be replacing this little stretch of hose here to the fuel pressure regulator. All right, so once we've got our fuel rail out, we've got it cleaned up, we can start reassembly and getting the injectors back into the car. But first, actually, let me try something. I learned this from a couple of Australian guys. Let me see this thing. Yep, that's perfectly in tune. All right, so I've set these injectors into place, and they're resting firmly in there. Of course, they get pushed down a little bit more on their little rubber cushion as you torque down the rail, but these are basically in the right place. I found that on a 1/8 you really have to put them in first before you put the rail on, because there's not enough clearance to get past the little piping on the rail that goes, you know, underneath here, and while the injectors are on there, if the intake manifold is already on there. So one thing that we have to plan out is the hose direction and just in general placement for the flex fuel sensor. So this is very light. It's like an ounce. So I think I'm just going to leave it kind of hanging in space. I don't think it really needs to be put anywhere. This is a possibility down here where the EGR valve used to be. You could put it over here, but as you can see, it kind of, with the connectors on there, it's going to bump up against the fuse box and everything like that. And plus, if you had a fuel leak, this is not a good place to have it. So now, one thing about putting it kind of right here is, can you still access your oil filter? And the answer is yes. So if I'm kind of reaching under here and I've now got my hand on the filter, it's basically under these hoses. So the fuel line is going to go up through, this is the input line, it's going to go up through the sensor, down and around, and then it's going to curve over this and under where it normally is routed. And then this is the return line, which is exactly the same as it was. So this is just going to sit right on top right there, and we should be good. Okay, got the fuel rail put back together. The new hoses are on. Decided to reuse this shielding. This is basically just a plastic sleeve, no big deal, but it's better than nothing probably. And quick note about the hose itself. You want to use an E85 rated hose, and the rating for that is SAE J30R9. That's the one that's low permeability, and it's rated for E85. The older hose, like R7 or something, is not. It's will probably work, but not potentially for very long. You know, it could corrode, and you could have a fuel leakage problem. So you don't want that. So if you're going to be replacing your hose, you might as well upgrade to the E85 compatible one, even if you don't really have any immediate plans to go to E85. Okay, so go ahead and slide the rail in and lightly place them onto the injectors. Make sure that the spacers are in there, and on top of this, the OEM spacers, you've got your little blue aluminum washer. It goes there to space it out just a tad more. You can put the bolts in about finger tight, and The reason you want it finger tight is just to give you some ability to rotate these just a little bit. That checks the seating of the O-rings, make sure it's in there nice and solidly, and it allows you to get them in the right orientation so that you can get the plug on there, because sometimes it's a little tight depending on which cylinder we're talking about. Okay, so this is what we ended up with. It's basically goes in from where the white dot is through the fuel sensor and then down and underneath the manifold, just like it did before, into the fuel rail. And you want these lines to be relatively short, and especially on the input side, the flex fuel sensor on the input side. And the reason for that is you want it to detect the alcohol level just before it enters so that it can immediately start making changes to your blended maps in the ECU. So to test things out, I like to take extra precautions because of my Plasti-Dip finish. If you don't know, Plasti-Dip is extremely fragile when around petroleum products like gasoline. So if there's any leaks, that would be a bad thing if it got on the paint. So I've tarped it off here. And what I've done is set it up so that the fuel pump and ground is jumpered, and I've got it connected to this handy remote control. It's a momentary switch, and what we're going to do is just run it for a few seconds. The key is in the on position, and we're going to look for any leaks. You can probably hear that running, and I don't see anything. So you want to give that a good 5 seconds, and then check for any drips, anything like that. There was no major leaks, but we could check for any drips or anything like that. And other than that, once we got everything plugged in, which I did, I plugged in the harness, we'll be all set to reconnect all of our vacuum lines and reconnect that solenoid and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll be good to try to start the car. Of course, before we start the car, we have to go into Megasquirt and TunerStudio and reconfigure a few things. So we'll do that in just a second. All right, so going into TunerStudio, the first thing we want to do is change our required fuel. So our injectors are now 640 cc. Okay. And then we need to change our injector dead time. And so for the 640 cc's, we want to do 120. So once the dead time is correct, you can come in here and look at your voltage curve. And what this does is it corrects, this is a percentage across the top, which I've already entered in actually. This is the correct voltages for the Flow Force 640 at 3 bar pressure, which is stock pressure, 143 psi. If you're running 4 bar, like you have a MB Miata, then you want to use the 4 bar pressure. And if you set up your Megasquirt the same way I have, which is a MS3X, then you're going to be using this top one. This bottom one, the main board injectors, don't matter. So put those in there, and we can see from the instructions on the site, it has all the stuff listed. So this is where I got all this stuff, and we'll have a link in the description. And once we've done that, we can burn and save it to the ECU. All right, so we're back out of the car. Gonna give it a little prime here. We should be all synced up. I just synced it a second ago. And we can try to start it up, see what it does. Oh, let's start a log. All right, so it's a little bit cooler today. It's in the 50s. Now it's kind of a long crank, but other than that, you know, probably clearing out the air and all that stuff in there. So we'll see what it does the second time. But sounding good. Obviously, it's running on all 4 cylinders. It would sound completely different if it was not. So this is the normal. This is how I've got it set for my idle. At this temperature, it's going to stay at about 1200 for a little while as it warms up, and we can tweak this. There's going to be some tweaking involved. Usually when adding injectors, you're mostly going to be changing required fuel, but there's always a little bit of extra tweaking and stuff. And it's supposed to be a little rich at the beginning when it's colder than what I would say like summer temperatures and stuff like that. So it should start out just a tad rich. It seems to like that a little bit better. We're at 32 on the map. It's all right. All right, so now that's good, we're going to get our flex fuel sensor wired up. I am going to wrap it up here. Stay tuned for the flex fuel setup tomorrow. If you enjoyed this, click the like button and don't forget to subscribe to be alerted for all new videos. I post every week, if not sooner. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.